Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video. And today I'm doing my May wrap up and talking about all the books that I read in the month of May. Before I get into my wrap-up, there is one other thing I wanted to mention today. In my last monthly wrap-up, I talked about this anthology, the London Short Story Prize Anthology 2018. And one of the short stories in this anthology was written by me, and this is now available to buy online, so just in case anybody wanted to buy the anthology, I will put the link in the description down below, because when I talked about it last month, it wasn't then available online. So yeah, right, on to the books. In the month of May, I read 15 books. 5 of them were unpublished books that I read for work. I work in publishing, so I can't talk about them today, but I do have 10 other books to talk to you about. So, starting off as usual with the classics. As those of you who have been watching this channel for a while will know, this year I'm doing something called the Trollope Project, where I try and read a novel by Anthony Trollope every month of the year, and May's Anthony Trollope read was this. This is Phineas Redu, which is the 4th book in the Palliser series, which is a series of interconnected novels based around Parliament in the Victorian period. Anthony Trollope is one of my favourite Victorian writers. This I really enjoyed, but it wasn't my favourite Anthony Trollope book. I would say, in fact, this is probably my least favourite of the Palliser novels so far. So this follows a character called Phineas Finn, who we also encountered in the 2nd book in the series, Phineas Finn. I can't say too much about this plot without spoiling earlier books in the series, but it follows him, his adventures and experiences in Parliament and all of the characters around him, including a lot of characters who were also in Can You Forgive Her and Phineas Finn and The Eustace Diamonds. The Palliser novels, like the Barsetshire Chronicles by Trollope, are a series of interconnected novels, but I will say that this one is pretty interconnected. Like, I don't think this book would make much sense to you if you hadn't read the 3 previous books in the series, and it also very heavily spoils the 3 previous books in the series. There are a lot of things in this that I found really interesting, and I would say the from halfway to 3/4, the 3rd quarter in this book was fantastic, really dramatic, really exciting, but I found that it had quite a slow start and I didn't love the ending. It wasn't the ending that I wanted, which is rare in Trollope. And all the way through the book I was like, I can see this might be going one way, and then I was trying to remind myself to trust Trollope, and then I trust him as a writer to usually put his plots in the direction that I want them to, and it didn't really go in the direction that I wanted it to. So I didn't hate the ending. I kind of came to terms with it, but it wasn't the ending of the novel that I wanted in 2 different ways. So I liked it, but yeah, definitely not my favourite Anthony Trollope and definitely not my favourite Palliser so far. Moving forward into the 20th century, this month I read A Room with a View by Ian Forster, which I really, really loved. I really like Ian Forster, and this is the 4th book that I've read by him. We follow a young woman called Lucy in Edwardian England and Italy. She travels to Italy with her cousin, and while there meets a man and his father who are of a class below them in a way, and considered rather ungentlemanly and to have bad manners, but Lucy is kind of intrigued by the young man, and then everything kind of goes on from there. Like all novels by Ian Forster, the characters are really superbly drawn, and the descriptions of Italy and England and the exploration of kind of class and ideas about respectability is just all fantastic. I love this a lot. Then this month I also finished off I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith, which I started back in April. This is a novel from the late 1940s, and it follows 2 sisters, their brother, their stepmother and father, and another guy who lives with them who is sort of a servant and sort of part of the family, and they live in what is called the castle, which is a kind of dilapidated, falling down old house away from the village, and they're sort of very upper middle class in birth, but have no money and are always really struggling for money. And it follows the kind of lives of these 2 sisters, their various friendships and romantic entanglements, especially when 2 young men move into the large house nearby that the castle is rented from. And the elder sister of the 2, who is the beautiful one, decides that what she has to do to kind of save her family is marry the eldest brother, who is going to get all the money so that she can support her family. There are a lot of things that I loved about this. The narrative writing style is absolutely fantastic, and I really, really enjoyed the way it's written. It's really, really good fun. It's all written as a diary, which is really, really fun, and the main character Cassandra is really, really interesting and kind of well developed and clever, and she's sort of 17, 18 at a real cusp between childhood and adulthood, and sometimes feels very much like a grown-up and sometimes definitely doesn't, partly because of this weird upbringing she's had. So all of those aspects I really liked, and I loved all of the relationships and dynamics between the families. I thought was so interesting, and some of the characters in here, like Stephen, I thought were wonderful. But I just really hated the ending. So I buddy read this with Marissa from Blatantly Bookish, and we both had incredibly similar thoughts about the ending, which was just that it wasn't It wasn't the ending we wanted to happen at all, and it didn't work for me at all. And I know this is a very beloved book, and I'd be interested to know if other people really like the ending, but I just really, really didn't like it. And I kept on waiting for the main character to realise certain things about other people, and she just didn't, and that upset me, and that saddened me. So I really loved the writing style, but the ending was definitely not the ending I wanted this book to have, and I found that a real shame, so yeah. Another one of my sort of projects/goals for this year is to try and read a Japanese translated book every month, and this month I read this. This is A Cat, a Man and Two Women by Junichiro Tanizaki. This is a slightly weird and really interesting book that I very much enjoyed. It follows the lives of a man, a cat and two women. This man was married to one of the women previously, and the way this book starts is with him married to his new wife. His ex-wife is living elsewhere, and the book begins with a letter from the ex-wife to the new wife saying, I really want the cat that I used to share with my husband, and if you give me the cat, I'll leave you and my ex-husband, your new husband, alone. And basically the book looks at the kind of a weird love square between this man, these two women and this cat, and basically Shozo, the husband, loves the cat much more than he loves either of the women, and he just really wants to hang out and spend time with his cat, but that doesn't go down well with his new bride. And it's a lovely little book about relationships and change and cats, and yeah, I would highly recommend it. I also read quite a lot of contemporary historical fiction this month, and two of the historical fiction books I read this month were shortlisted for the Walter Scott Prize. So I've been reading along with some of the long list and all of the shortlists for the Walter Scott Prize, and so I've reviewed these two books separately, and I'll link that down below. But of course I want to talk about them a little bit in my wrap-up as well. So the first was A Long Way From Home by Peter Carey. This is set in 1950s Australia and follows a woman called Irene, her husband Titch, and their next door neighbour Willie as they grow to know each other better and then embark upon a road race around Australia and also learn more about Aboriginal communities living in Australia. So there were some things I really liked about this. At the beginning I thought I was going to really enjoy the writing style, and I really liked the character of Irene. I thought she was really interesting, and a lot of the themes that are dealt with in the second half of the book are quite interesting. However, for me, I found this quite an unfocused kind of rambling narrative in which I couldn't work out what the centre was, and the second half of the book felt like a very different book to the first half of the book, but in a way that I didn't think was entirely well handled, especially because Irene very much felt like the main character in the first half of the book, and then the second half of the book it seemed much less about her. And the kind of idea of the car race around Australia, which I thought would be really interesting, is actually not a very big part of this book, although that is what's like on the cover with the car and what's in all the like copy and blurb and stuff. So there were some things I found interesting about this, but overall I found it a little bit disappointing because I couldn't really work out what it was about, I suppose. But I also read And Now We Should Be Entirely Free by Andrew Miller, which I absolutely love. This is a brilliant historical fiction novel set in Britain in 1809, and it follows a man called John who's just come back from the Napoleonic Wars and kind of travels from his home in England up to Scotland in order to kind of escape his past and all the things that are haunting him, but doesn't realise all the way that he is being pursued by another Englishman and a Spaniard who have come to like punish him for something that may or may not have happened during the war. It was really engaging and exciting, really dramatic and powerful and beautifully written. I could have done with a few more pages at the end, but aside from that I thought this was absolutely brilliant, and this is definitely my favourite to win the Walter Scott Prize. I also read A Long Long Way by Sebastian Barry. This is a historical novel set during the First World War, and I picked this up kind of completely on a whim. So I've read one other book by Sebastian Barry before, Days Without End, which I absolutely loved, so I've been meaning to read more by him for ages. I do have The Secret Scripture on my shelf, but my library happened to have the audiobook of A Long Long Way on overdrive, so I thought I would give it a listen, and I found it really interesting. The main character is a man called Willie Dunn, and we follow him in his early life at the beginning and then mostly his experiences in the First World War. He is Irish, and so one of the things the book explores really, really interestingly is his kind of conflict between fighting as part of the British Army really in World War I, but also not feeling entirely British and being conflicted about kind of uprisings going on back at home in Dublin to do with gaining home rule for Ireland. I have slightly mixed feelings on this book. Like, in a way, it wouldn't be quite accurate to say I enjoyed this, partly because the writing style is so dense that it took me a while to get into, and especially an audiobook, I think the beginning was quite confusing. And also because this book is really, really unflinching and brutal and quite stark in its depiction of World War I. Quite accurate, I think, but really harrowing to read. Like, usually I listen to audiobooks while I'm eating dinner, but this was not an audiobook I could listen to and eat at the same time because it was so graphic in its depictions of violence. But at the same time, it was brilliant and it was a really incredible book. And I'm really glad that I read it, and I think it was really, really powerful, but I don't think enjoy would be the right word. So this is a book I would definitely recommend, but I think it's worth saying that it's very, very harrowing. But I'm definitely glad I read it, and I'm looking forward to reading more by Sebastian Barry in the future. Another historical fiction novel I read this month was The Bedlam Status by Natasha Pulley. This I loved a lot and was so fun to read. So I read The Watchmaker of Filigree Street last year and absolutely loved it, and I was really looking forward to reading this. I bought it like a year ago and it's just been sitting on my shelves and I haven't got to it yet, and I don't really know why. But in the month of May, I buddy read this with Marissa from Blatantly Bookish, and we both really, really enjoyed this a lot. Though interestingly, I think Marissa slightly prefers this over The Watchmaker of Filigree Street, and I slightly prefer The Watchmaker of Filigree Street over this, though I still think this is a fantastic novel. So this starts in Victorian England. We follow a man called Merrick. He was previously in the Navy and with the India office working abroad, and while serving abroad he was injured. So at the beginning of the book we find him struggling to walk, living with his brother Charles, a bit miserable about life and sort of thinking that he's going a little bit mad. And then he is visited by an old kind of colleague of his, Clem, who says that he has been charged by the India office to go to Peru to harvest quinine, which is a good cure for malaria, because they need that for other people who are out in the rest of the British Empire. So Merrick and Clem embark upon this mission to Peru, but when they get there, everything kind of changes for Merrick and things are not what they seem, and they go on a journey with a native from Peru called Raphael, who becomes their guide, and there's like a tiny bit of magic and a lot of adventure, and it's basically just really, really cool. I love Natasha Pulley's writing style, and the other thing that I love about both her books is that they're both like really dramatic, plot heavy, tense, really, really exciting, lots happening, but also with such beautiful writing, such wonderful characterization, like such powerful, interesting moments, and I just loved this a lot. It was really, really wonderful, and the ending like made me so happy. The way this book looks at like disability and 19th century approaches to disability is really interesting as well. And the way it looks at like Peru and 19th century British colonial views about certain places is really interesting too. I just thought this was fantastic, and yes, I would highly, highly recommend it. One thing I will say is that I would recommend reading The Watchmaker of Filigree Street first, because there are a few like references to The Watchmaker of Filigree Street in here, which means I think this would make less sense if you've read The Watchmaker of Filigree Street, and also you get more out of this if you have read it. And I'm quite excited. Natasha Pulley's got another book coming out next year, which is apparently a sequel to The Watchmaker of Filigree Street, but I think this is also sort of linked to The Watchmaker of Filigree Street. So in my head I'm like really hoping she's going to write like a loose series of interconnected novels, which as you know is one of my favourite things, so we shall see. I also read one middle grade book in May, and that was The Whispering Skull by Jonathan Stroud. This is the second book in the Lockwood & Co series, which I've been listening to and really enjoying. They're like ghostly urban fantasy / possibly horror novels for middle grade, and I have to say that middle grade horror is about as scary as I can handle. So this series is set in a world where there are ghosts, and only children can really see and sense ghosts, and particular children have certain abilities in order to sense ghosts. Ghosts are dangerous, so in this like alternative version of our world, no one really goes out at night because there are ghosts about, except for the children who are part of agencies who are there to like slay the ghosts. And we follow a small up-and-coming agency called Lockwood & Co, which consists of 3 people: Anthony Lockwood, George Cubbins, and our narrator Lucy Carlyle, and it basically follows them in their mysterious ghost fighting adventures. I find these books really fun and really enjoyable. They're entertaining and funny and just like the right amount of silly and the right amount of like important, interesting character development. I will say that I find the plots slightly predictable in both this and the last one. Like, I guessed who the bad guy was really early on, but you know, they are for like 12-year-olds, so if I was 12 maybe I wouldn't have guessed that, and they're still really enjoyable, really great reads. I really like Jonathan Stroud as an author. And then finally I read one non-fiction book in May, and that was Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. The subtitle is Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men, and basically the book looks at how the way we collect data has been biased towards men for so many years that we often like leave women out of calculations about how things work. For example, when you test cars for safety in Europe, you don't have to test them with female crash dummy models, you only have to use male crash dummy models, which means women are more likely to be injured in car crashes than men. And similarly, like the symptoms of heart attacks that everyone knows about and that are taught to doctors are actually the symptoms of men's heart attacks, and women's heart attacks often have different symptoms. So she talks about a lot of things like this, and also a lot of other ways in which the world has kind of been designed to suit men rather than women. The fact that a lot of machinery and musical instruments are designed around the size of men's hands rather than women's hands, which tend to be smaller. The fact that the kind of standard office temperature to have is actually perfect for men but slightly too cold for women, and a lot of things like this. It's a really, really interesting, fascinating book. I will say that I have like some reservations about some of her use of data. Like sometimes she uses data for very specific countries or very specific areas to extrapolate to much larger things, or sometimes she uses data to support her argument, which doesn't completely add up. I think a lot of this is to do with the lack of data out there, which is like the whole point of the book. And overall, I found it really, really interesting and very powerful and eye-opening to read and to think about. And that is all. Those are all the things I can talk to you about that I read in the month of May. Please let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. And I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.